says, when the child reaches puberty, assuming he has sanity, he is saying he or she now becomes mukallaf, taklif, pubescence, which we spoke about. We said likewise in the language of my people, taklif has a particular meaning. It's like a difficulty someone has to endure or go through. It's interesting that when I was researching this, I have an interest in words, that the word taklif comes from the word kalif. And there's a hadith on Sayyidina Umar ibn al-Khattab, may Allah be pleased with him, who said, Uthman, speaking about Sayyidina Uthman kalifun bi-iqaribihi, that Uthman is kalif, this word taklif, but he's kalif towards what? His relatives. Taklif or kalif in language means what? Shadid al-hub, someone that has an immense love for someone. Why make mention of that? When he speaks about in the text, he says what? That when a child reaches pubescence, puberty, because the signs in fiqh, they are biological signs. Once those biological signs, and they do differ in the different Islamic schools of law, when someone is deemed to be addressed by sacred law, if it's coupled with sanity, because obviously there's no taklif for someone who does not have his mental or her mental faculties, now they are what? Charged with sacred law. But why do I mention the fact that what? The fact that the word comes from shadid al-hub, like an immense love towards someone. Because what we have to understand, as part and parcel of our tradition, when Allah entrusts us with now sacred law, it's a sign of love for us. It's wanting good for us. Because it's a sad reality that sometimes in conversations that we have with our community, people see a difficulty in quote unquote the laws that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has made binding upon us. Well, know that it stems from the word that what? Love. And it's not just love. Shadid al-hub. Uthman kana kalifun, bi-aqaribihi. That Sayyidina Uthman was kalif. He had immense love for his family. So when we speak about taklif, when Allah charges now, you are now mukallaf, you are now charged or addressed by sacred law, it's an extension or an expression, of love from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. I.e., it's the ayn of rahmah, that if someone embodies our sacred law, our lofty, noble, sacred law, it's a sign that Allah loves you. These things are the ayn of rahmah, they are the essence of mercy. Because we've said this time and time again, when we learn Islamic law, which is about what? Regulating the limbs. But it's about regulating the limbs not as what? Not as an expression of a list of do's and don'ts. Rather, it's an expression of regulating your limbs so you act in a way that's in accordance with who? Al-Habib, the one who was loved by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And no one was loved by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala like the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. And so he says, when a child reaches puberty, assuming he is sane, he becomes mukallaf, accountable. And God's discourse becomes addressed to him, including his injunctions and his prohibitions, promises and warnings, rewards and punishment, and God's commands. And God commands the two noble guardian angels to record his good deeds and evil deeds. The one on the right, his good deeds, and the one on his left, his sins. And then he brings two particular verses from the Quran. What we have to understand here, when we're speaking about the lives of man, that even within this particular life, it's about understanding stages. Barakallahu feekum, jazakallah khair. Right? It's about understanding stages. Because, sometimes we infantilize our children. We don't allow them to become what? Men. You have to know that you're moving your child, the responsibility of you as educators, as teachers, as parents. You have to let your child know that he or she is moving from one stage to another stage. Right? We spoke about childhood. And at that stage, at one level, what? It's do. Sam'an wa ta'atan. Your child, I hear and I obey. They may not understand the rationale for particular acts of worship. Mur awladakum bisila wa hum sab'a sinin. Command your children to pray at the age of 7. Whether they understand the blessings of prayer, the rationale of prayer, the inner meanings of prayer, the words that they're reciting. No, right now it's a what? Inculcate in them, regulate them to just act upon this. But now they reach a stage where the maturity starts to form. They should understand it's a different stage. It's not a stage of just doing. It's a stage of what? Reflection. And so he says, he brings two verses here from the Quran. We've mentioned them to you time and time again, but the first one, وَإِنَّ عَلَيْكُمْ لَحَافِظِينَ, right? That Allah says that each and every single one of you has this particular type of angels, حَافِظِينَ كِرَامًا كَاتِبِينَ, those who record. يَعْلَمُونَ مَا تَفْعَلُونَ, they are fully aware of what you do. And think about that one verse. There's certain ahadith we've mentioned, if we could just live certain ahadith, our lives would be transformed. Likewise, this verse. If you are cognizant of this verse, the verse is saying what? Inna alaykum, that upon you God has placed what? Lahafidina kiraman, noble hafidin, this particular group of angels. Katibina ma ya'lamuna ma taf'alun, those who scribe and they know exactly what you're doing. And in the other verse, وَمَا يَلْفِظُ عَنْ قَوْلٍ إِلَّا لَدَيْهِمْ رَقِيبٌ عَتِيدٌ, never ever does anything utter or exit from your mouth. Lafadha in Arabic literally means to throw something. We say in Urdu, lafz, lafz. Lafadha means to cast. Be careful what you throw out of your mouth. Because Allah says, وَمَا يَلْفِظُ عَنْ قَوْلٍ إِلَّا لَدَيْهِمْ رَقِيبٌ عَتِيدٌ, never do they utter a single thing, save that they have raqibun atid. Imagine you're living these two verses. That you are aware, again, why instill this in your children? So they start to become more aware of what the celestial realm, the angelic realm. That it's not me, myself, and I. This ephemeral, fleeting, ersatz world that tells you about just focus on yourself. If you understand and again open up the world of angel to your children, open up the world of the angels to your students, open up the world of the angels to those who are in your sphere of influence, something beyond you. Right? It brings an immense connection that you're aware that we are, like we said this before, you think there's no angels here right now? Recording the names of the people that are in this gathering? Paying attention to what's being said? How wonderful that we're in the gathering of who? The gathering of malaika. But again, the cognizance that should become to the heart and mind is every single thing that's uttered, it's recorded. You will act and conduct yourself in a very different way. And so he says here, angels commanded to what? Page 20, moving on. Angels commanded to scrutinize and remember all that he does till death. Like we said, till death do you part. That they are with you, recording every single thing. And he says, he brings another verse, وَجَاءَتْ كُلُّ نَفْسٍ مَعَهَا سَائِقٌ وَشَهِيدٌ. It's a reminder that God tells you that every soul comes with what? A driver and a witness, a shaheed. So the things that we have to again focus on this particular, within this stage, within this life, is that within the life are stages. Right? So a statement that's attributed to what? Sayyidina Umar. لَعِبْهُ سَبْعًا وَأَدِّبْهُ سَبْعًا وَصَاحِبْهُ سَبْعًا. Stages. For 7 years, لَعِبْهُ. Play with your children. That's education for them. Wholesome education is playing with your children. Not to give them some device and let the devil now rear your children. No, you actively play with your children for 7 years. وَأَدِبْهُمْ سَبْعًا. And now from they move, you can see stages, right? Now when they move from 7 years onwards, أَدِبْهُمْ. Teach them adab, teach them manners. And then at the age of 14, when they move on to 15, which in the school of Imam Shafi'i is one of the signs of when someone is baligh, mature now. And he says, وَصَاحِبْهُ سَبْعًا. And now for 7 years, be a companion to your child. Not a friend. A parent is not a friend. The parent is the parent. The guardian is the guardian. But be someone now that allows your child to be a person of maturity. Don't infantilize your child. Don't infantilize your student. Allow them now to become into their maturity. But again, it doesn't mean that once they're baligh, once they're mukallaf, ma salama. Because in fiqh, for example, when a child reaches the age of bulugh, when he's mukallaf, now their wealth, the zakat has to come from their own wealth. The Eid al-Fitr has to come from their own wealth. And it's not a case of, okay, now that they're baligh, now that they're entrusted or charged with sacred law in the eyes of God, that they're just left. Lo, sahibhum sab'a. Be their companion for 7 years. I allow them to again mature into a healthy, wholesome, religiously minded human being for the next 7 years. You still have a role as a parent. You know, and again, this concept of stages. Our children are not the infants up until beyond marriage now. You know, one of the criticisms of our sisters in the community is, you know, when we're trying to find spouses, there's no men, and we don't mean the physical construct of a man. Someone who knows how to take care of someone who's mature, someone who's considerate. Because when we spoke about the L poem, if you remember a few weeks ago when we speak about the tarbiyah, and the Prophet said, or it's attributed to others, علموا أولادكم لعامية العرب فإن فيه الأخلاق. Educate your children in the L poem of the Arabs, because in it is good or lofty manners. And if you see here in the beginning of that poem, it says what? أقيموا بني أمي صدور متيئكم. He's saying, prepare, meaning he's speaking to who? Bani my mother, or the tribe of my mother. Prepare your mounts, your steeds. فَإِنِّي إِلَى قَوْمٍ سِوَاكُمْ لَأَمْيَلُوا. Because now moving over to the qawm. So look at the beginning of that poem says what? أَقِيمُ بَنِي أُمِّي. Stand or rise the family of my mother. I.e., those early years, it's women. And we see that in the life of the Prophet ﷺ, his blessed mother Sayyidina Amina, may Allah be pleased with her. We see his Sharifa, the mother of Abdurrahman ibn Auf, may Allah be pleased with her. We see Barakul Habashiyah, all these the names of the females that were focused upon what? The tarbiyah of the Prophet ﷺ. And then thereafter now he says what? فَإِنِّي إِلَى قَوْمٍ سِوَاكُمْ لَأَمْيَلُوا. Now I'm going to move towards the qawm who are not you. سِوَاكُمْ. What's al-qawm in the Arabic language? Ar-rijal dun an-nisa. It means in language men, not women. So you see the stage that has to be inculcated in a child's mind, that he's coming in or she's coming into their maturity. La ilaha illallah. And so he says, page 20, when a child reaches puberty, the father, the guardian, reminds him anew of the articles of faith. So look, you've taught your child, again, that rote learning. Memorize these things right now. You're blessed with this immense, sponge-like memory. Right now, memorize. Now when they reach a stage of puberty, the guardian reminds them anew. You refresh this understanding in your child of the articles of faith and the obligations and the prohibitions. Even if he has already been taught these things, for now he has entered upon what? Now he's entered upon a new stage. Right? Now he's entered upon a new stage, and his situation is somewhat different. My son, Allah bless him, he would play with prayer in those early years. But when he came baligh, now he realized, okay, now it's serious. Now if I try and get out of prayer, if I try and hide, now there's a consequence to that, because he was taught that. Even I've commanded him to pray, but there are times where, okay, I'm not going to beat him up. He's my height now as well. So he thinks he's got something on me. But my generation, never, till death do us part. But the point being what? Now he realizes that when he became baligh, it's a different story. But how did he get that understanding? Because he was in these circles, because he was in lessons, because he knew the responsibility that's upon him now. Because he's saying here, it's an important point, because his situation is different now. Once you are entrusted with sacred law, now it's serious. And this affair is, إِنَّهُ لَقَوْلٌ فَصَلُ مَا هُوَ بِالْحَزْلِ. Allah says in the Quran, this is a discerning word. It's not a joke. That's the words of God. This isn't a joke. You see at the age of 15, which I said which is a sign of bulugh in the valley of Hadramaut, they make sure that now at 15 they will teach what? The Bidayat al-Hidayah of Imam al-Ghazali. And once the child has memorized and understood that book, they have a ceremony where they will place the turban around the head of the child at 15. See, marking these stages in life. Now you're 15, we're going to teach you this book. And it's a book that's going to stay with you and benefit you from now up until the time you meet your Lord. And once they've memorized those particular litanies and they've understood that book, now it's a ceremony. Place the imama upon that child. So he feels he's coming into a different stage in his life. Even though he's saying what? Remind him anew. Not that they didn't know what they were reminded before, but we're marking this as something now significant in his or her life. And again, he goes back to the point I was saying about what? Just because the child is baligh now doesn't mean that they don't need encouragement. Doesn't mean that you have absolved yourself of responsibility. No, you still have responsibility. So he says, although at puberty they reach accountability, they still need encouragement. Reminding and explanations about what he has become accountable for, about religious obligations such as the prayer, fasting, keeping away from prohibited things such as adultery. Look at this, tell him that homosexuality is haram. We have conversations with this with adults and they start giggling. No, this is real. So have these mature conversations. Your child should be able to feel they can come to you and speak to you about anything. And rather they speak to you in a safe space as opposed to speaking with other people or other things in an unsafe space. We gave you the 1044 Imam al-Haddad 400 years ago. These are the conversations you to have with your children who are no longer children in the eyes of God. So speak to them about what? The prohibitions of adultery, the prohibitions of homosexuality, the prohibitions of drinking alcohol, wrongfully consuming other people's wealth. We can all very easily fall into that one, whether by interest, usury, or coercion, or deceit, or any other method. Okay, so Allah says, فَذَكِرْ فَإِنَّ ذِكْرَ تَنْفَعَ الْمُؤْمِنِينَ. Your Lord tells you this in the Quran. Remind people. People need to be reminded. The Quran is known as a dhikra, is it not? The thing that reminds you. And remember we said, what does dhikr mean in language? Someone who's dhakir is what? Someone who's awake, someone who's alert, someone who's cognizant. فَذَكِّرْ فَإِنَّ ذِكْرَ تَنْفَعُ لَكِنْ تَنْفَعْ مَنْ Ya Rab. Your Lord tells you, remind, because remind profits or benefits who? فَإِنَّ ذِكْرَ تَنْفَعَ الْمُؤْمِنِينَ. Those who have iman. And so one is that to remind, one is to encourage, and you yourself should be what? You should be a gracious recipient of advice that's given to you as well. Because your child is no longer a child now. In the eyes of God, he or she is an adult. And so that means that it's a two-way relationship. Yes, you're the parent. But just in life, when the Prophet said, Adinu Nasiha, religion in and of itself is sincere advice, good counsel. But one of the understandings of that is that it's not about just you giving nasiha. Just you're the one giving advice. No, be a gracious recipient of the one who's giving you advice. And seek advice from those people who you know are going to give you advice based on truth, not some type of sycophant that wants to make you feel good. Or I'll go and ask him or her because I know that if I speak to him or her, I'll hear what I want to hear. That's not the sincerity in friendship. La ilaha illallah. But because this is a new phase of responsibility, they have to understand the obligations with some type of gravity. Okay? And so he says here, we mentioned that the verses, they are commanded to scrutinize, we spoke about every step. When a child reaches puberty, his father and his guardian should remind him anew of the articles of faith. He's entering into a new stage. Even though at puberty he has become accountable, he still needs encouragement about the explanations for these things. What does he mean by renewing this? Here now, formal education should begin. Marhaban, they've done, they memorize vast tracts of information they can do prior to the age of 7. 7 onwards they can do well. But when they hit maturity now formal education, like I said, with some gravity. They should understand the weightiness of what this religion impresses and imposes upon them. So start the formal education of your children by telling them from the halal and haram, basic fiqh, basic aqidah. Why is it that all books of fiqh almost exclusively in all schools, when you do a first, what's known as a primer in the English language, like an introductory book into Islamic law about the prayer, about ablution or tahara, about prayer, about zakat, about hajj, those books are tripartite. There's 3 parts to them. To start giving the basic understandings of what we call theology. How do we understand Allah? Again, imprinting these understandings from that impressionable age. This is how we understand God. This is how we understand angels. This is how we understand hell and heaven. Then you move on to basic fiqh about prayer and what we just mentioned. And then the last part of the tripartite structure of these books is to speak about what? About the ills of the heart, what we call spirituality. You'll find it in the madhab of Abu Hanifa, rahmatullahi. You find it in the madhab of Imam Malik. You find it in the madhab of Imam Shafi'i. It's in all the schools. So formal education should begin. We've not left it too late. It's never too late to learn. But, we learn things now that 8-year-olds know in traditional communities. When I first went to Dar Mustafa and I attended my first lesson, all the students stood up because they thought I was a teacher. Because I'm sitting with youth. And I'm like, no, I'm with you. It was a humbling experience to sit down and then look at the teacher who looked half my age, to be honest with you. But these are just basic understanding. So here when he mentions these things about, teaching about the prayer, fasting, keeping away from those things that we just mentioned, this is what? Learning the halal and the haram, i.e. formal education now starts for your child. They are now addressed by God. They have to understand again by you treating your child different. They've entered into a new stage of their life. It's significant and important by virtue of the fact that we do not do these things with our children. We don't recognize these signposts, these markers in their life, to try and facilitate them to become wholesome, well-rounded, religiously minded human beings that are going to go off. You're going to be dead one day, and very soon. How do your children navigate this, crazy is the right word for it, this crazy world right now? And like I said last week, don't outsource this education to anyone. Don't outsource this to OCC. Don't outsource this to Ribat. You have a responsibility as a parent. Even if they are learning these, what are they learning? How do you reinforce that in your home? How do you reinforce that? Remind your children when they go off to school, when they go off to where they're going, to make sure they maintain this identity. But the point being, saying what? Formal education now begins. And so he finishes off this chapter by saying, although these are things any sane adult should seek to understand himself, فَاقِدُ شَيْءٍ لَا يُعْطِي. Someone that doesn't have can't give. So Imam al-Haddad is saying what? The understanding is that you got something to give your child. What's the understanding here? What if we haven't done these things ourselves? Allah bless the community and all of these organizations that have regular lessons for us to attend as adults, particularly with the theology and the fiqh and the like, which we should all know. Because how do you then correct a child's understanding if you don't have it? So he's saying here that although these are things that any sane adult should seek to understand himself, of course, Imam al-Haddad is saying, of course you already have done this, haven't you? You've been through this. So just as you've been through it, make sure you facilitate it for who? Facilitate it for your child. And if he has not been informed about them prior to reaching adulthood, it remains the duty of parents and guardians to encourage and prompt him to learn and to practice what he learns. Okay, so marhaban, you've had something in your life, you weren't able to necessarily facilitate that. Do it. Right? Do it. Make sure you do it. That's still your responsibility as the parent, the teacher, and the guardian to encourage and prompt him to both not just learn but practice what he or she learns. So when the children go to the madrasa and they learn a dhikr about, I can see it, tomorrow morning I'm going to be teaching, alhamdulillah, by Allah's immense grace, children. And, we'll do the lesson about, the benefits of eating with the right hand and, the dhikr before you eat. And the break comes and they're all running around with left hands and, they have to be reminded, don't they? They're children. They have to be reminded. The practice of what they're learning. This constitutes either an obligation or a firm recommendation, i.e., does a child know what is fard from the things which are obliged on him or her? Does he know that this is a sunnah? Does he know the difference between the two? Does he know that the prayer comprises of certain integrals and things which then enhance the prayer? These are all things that they should know, depending on the condition both of the parents and the offspring. And now on the bottom of page 20 he says what? After the onset of puberty, the first stage of youth begins. So when someone is in their post-pubescent stage, they're now classed as what? Shabab. shab, youth. And so this is one of the most important stages in someone's life. Not that the aql has matured, not that the intellect has matured. But he says here, look what he says. After the onset of puberty, the first stage, awwal tawr al-shabab, begins. A stage where energy is abundant. Right? You see me coming on a walking stick sitting on this chair. If Allah allows me to see 63, most of my life is gone. If you think about that. If Allah allows me to see the wonderful age of 63, most of my life has gone. And I remember the energy and the exuberance you had as a young man. So he says that at this stage, energy is abundant and strength is continually increasing, which means that this stage is most suited for what? Not going to the gym, not perfecting your penalties. He says is what? Now it is about what? Winning reward, doing good works, avoiding sin and reprehensible acts. However, it is also what? A hazardous stage. La ilaha illallah. So again, first and foremost, bring in the word what? Stage. Pubescence we spoke about. Mark that so your child knows that they have come into now a stage where God is addressing them directly. Okay? Now another stage. Marhaban, you've been blessed with this energy, this youth. Strength is now increasing. The intellect starts to mature now. This is the time to what? Get as much good deeds as you can. And he brings the hadith later on, we'll bring it here though, that قال رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم لرجل وهو يعظه. Okay, so first and foremost that the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, said to a man, an individual, وهو يعظه, and he's giving him a wa'adh. Okay, again, words are important. So I looked up what's the definition of a wa'adh. هو تذكيرك للإنسان بما يلين قلبه من الثواب والإقاب. When you give someone a wa'adh, which is the companion said, wa'adna Rasulullah sallallahu, the Prophet gave us a wa'adh like a sermon. وَجِدَتْ مِنْهُ الْقُلُوبِ, that the hearts trembled, وَذَرَفَتْ مِنْهُ الْعُيُونِ, and caused the eyes to just, profusely weep. And so here he's saying that I'm giving a person, the Prophet is giving a person a wa'adh, and a wa'adh is what? That you're going to remind or impress upon a person in relation to that which softens his or her heart. From the aspects of reminding them of rewards and also reminding them also, not just rewards, there's there's punishment, consequences to actions. And so the first thing that the Prophet said in this wa'adh, in this admonition or this sermon, اغتنم خمسا قبل خمسٍ. Pay attention and make sure you benefit from 5 before the occurrence of 5. And the first thing is what? شبابك قبل حرمك. Take the benefit of your youth before you become old, before you're on a walking stick, before you're tired, before you're fatigued. Ya laytani. Now we're going to say, oh, if I was young, I would have done. There's a famous line of, we learn it in the books of grammar, a line of poetry. يعني ليت الشباب يعود يوما فأخبره بما فعل المشيب. How I wish youth would come back to me so I could tell him what old age had done to me. But it's gone. And so he says, اغتنم, take the benefit of 5 before 5. Your youth before old age. وصحتك قبل سقمك, and likewise good health before you are tried with ill health. وغناك قبل فقرك, and likewise wealth before poverty. وَفَرَاغَكَ قَبْلَ شُغْلِكَ, and when you're blessed with free time before you become preoccupied. وَحَيَاتِكَ قَبْلَ مَوْتِكَ, and likewise your life before you die. And so the exuberance of youth allows you to have that energy. How many of us as a young man or woman expended our youth in what? Things that pleased Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Or is the norm, and we try to speak in terms of norms of our community, is the norm other than that? That we use this intellect, this strength, this energy for things which are at odds or procured the displeasure of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It's worrying. And again, not that he's going to speak here, and again, I'm glad, the ulama, they understand the reality of human beings. Understanding we are not angelic human beings. And he's going to bring a point, particularly of a hadith, which speaks about understanding the nature, the true reality of what? Youth. Because youth are stupid. When I used to do the different prisons I used to go to, the most challenging one was young offenders. Because they're young and stupid. And they're in that stage of like immaturity, moving into immaturity some years later. You speak to prisons that are like lifers, they're really interesting human beings in terms of their reflections on life and the like. But when you go to the young offenders, it's a totally different story. You try to give some advice, it's very difficult to get through to the youth. So it's not as if Imam al-Haddad or Allah doesn't understand the stupidity of youth. But again, the stages are all interlinked. From the moment a child comes forth from the stomach of his mother, these stages are all linked, meaning what? Grab them there, take your responsibility here seriously, and then you facilitated a wonderful road to paradise for your child. And this is highlighted where? In the hadith of what? The day is coming, right? We all know the day is coming. That the day is coming, that there's only going to be what? The shade of the throne of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And the Prophet's very articulate and specific as to who is going to be a recipient of what? The shade of God's throne on a day where there is no shade. And so he says, سَبْعَةٌ يُظْلِمُهُمُ اللَّهُ يَوْمَ الْقِيَامَةِ. Allah Himself will afford shade to 7 categories of people. يَوْمَ لَا ظِلَّ إِلَّا ظِلُّهُ. On a day that is only His shade, there's no other shade. Imamun Adil, someone who is a just leader. Second one is what? Shabun nasha'a fi ibadatillah. A youth that has been blessed by having again that wonderful upbringing. So he just spent his time where? In the worship of God. That's someone that secured himself on that day. وَرَجُلٌ ذَكَرَ اللَّهِ فِي خَلَاءٍ. A person who makes dhikr of Allah when he's in solitude in his own private space. فَفَادَتْ عَيْنَاهُ. To the extent that his eyes overflow with tears. وَرَجُلْ قَلْبَهُ مُعَلَّقٌ فِي الْمَسَاجِدِ. And someone whose heart is connected to the mosques. وَرَجُلًا تَحَابَ فِي اللَّهِ. And 2 people, they just love each other for the sake of Allah. They're not here to get money, they're not here to try and get a job, they're not here to ask for all, they're just to have that, that love just for the sake of Allah. And it's not that common. Because human beings want things from other people. But to solely love someone just for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And then a man دَعَتْهُ امْرَأَةٌ ذَاتَ مَنْصَبٍ وَجَمَالٍ. And a man who is enticed by a woman of standing and beauty. فَقَالَ إِنِّي خَافَ اللَّهِ. And he responds by saying, I fear God. وَرَجُلٌ تَصَدَّقَ بِصَدَقَةٍ فَأَخْفَاهَا حَتَّى لَا يَعْلَمْ شَمَالُهُ مَا صَنَعَتْ يَمِينُهُ. And a person who gives charity, but it's undisclosed. He hides it to the extent that his right hand is unaware that his left hand, meaning he does it in a way that's really quiet. But here we're focused on who? The second one. Shabun nasha'a fi ibadatillah. A youth that's been brought up in the worship of God. Right? A youth. Now, subhanallah, he brings an interesting point here, which again, understanding the psychology of human beings. However, it is also what? A hazardous stage. Because I just told you, youth are stupid. Right? Young'uns aren't the most intelligent people. And you're arrogant because you're coming into your manhood. You have physical strength. You may have independence now from family. You think you know better. However, it's also a hazardous stage of which one should be wary, for many or even most young people are inclined towards worldly desires and prefer immediate pleasures to decent actions and observances. That's the nature of the nafs, isn't it? Even the word shabbaba means what? Shabbabtu means what? I wrote love letters. Think about that. So the shab, the youth, comes from the word the person who writes love letters. Yeah? Emotional. Inclined towards desire. That's the word shab actually comes from. Someone that, see again, Allah knows the fitrah of human beings. And he brings a statement and he brings a hadith of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. La ilaha illallah. Where is it? And so let's bring what he says first. Now, that it's unusual to find a youth established in obedience. So we're asking youth to what? Be obedient. We're asking them to be upright. But it's not as if Imam al-Haddad doesn't understand the nature of human beings. And so he says it's unusual to find a youth established in obedience, longing for good works and neglectful of worldly desires and ephemeral pleasures. Right? People like to, fulfill their desires, especially young, foolish, stupid people. But he brings a hadith that إِنَّ اللَّهَ لَا يُعْجَبُ مِنَ الشَّابِ لَيْسَتْ لَهُ صَبْوَةٌ. It's in the Musnad of Imam Ahmad, that your Lord, indeed God, He wonders at a young man that has or shows no passions. Allah has placed those things within us, hasn't He? Even as adults, we incline towards sensual things. We incline towards intimacy. We incline towards fragrance. We incline towards indulgence. But even more so in someone who's what? Blessed with physical vigor, right? That energy. So here, look, he's even saying, understanding the nature of human beings, Allah is fully aware. But He's actually amazed at a child, or a youth, actually not a child, that doesn't have these passions or desires. Save that what? Like we said time and time again, your tarbiyah, or the inculcating of good manners in your child, is to make sure what? Those passions do not overwhelm you or overwhelm your child. Because that's just the nafs then, isn't it? That's just the wanton, lower desire, allowing to be what? To run amok. They have to be trained. They have to be educated. Because the Prophet said in a hadith which kind of highlights this, لَيْسَ الشَّدِيدُ بِسَرْعَةٍ أو سُرْعَةٍ. The one who is we class as someone who's strong. He's speaking about physical strength. But we're speaking about what? Spiritual strength. That the one who is classed as strong is not strong because he's good at wrestling. Surah. إِنَّمَا الشَّدِيدُ الَّذِي يَمْلِكْ نَفْسُهُ عِنْدَ الْغَضَبِ. The one who is truly strong has got control of himself, particularly when those angers or those passions come to the fore. That's someone, in our tradition, that's shadid. Anyone can slap someone. But it takes a man who has control of himself. فَإِنِّي إِلَى قَوْمٍ سِوَاكُمْ لَعَمْيَلُوا. That's the hadith, that's the poem of Shamfara. Now I'm moving over to the realm of being a man. I'm moving over to the men. It's easy to what? If we come across people that are like rude or belligerent, the easy thing is to what? React. It's easy to lose your temper. Anyone can do that. But the Prophet saying, La, ash-shadid, man ash-shadid, who's the strong one? Alladhi yamlik nafsahu 'inda al-ghadab. The one that has control over himself, particularly when what? Anger comes to the fore. So it's not about we're not understanding what youth are like. We were youth, for God's sake. We all know what we did, and we don't need to hear what you all did. But everyone knows what they did. So it's not as if we don't understand that why are youth. No, we were youth. We were stupid. We did things that we shouldn't have done. So there's a clear understanding of the psychology of human beings. But again, the interconnectivity of those stages. If we grab them from birth, grab them again as they're growing up, make sure that they're again inculcating in them these particular things that they should just say whether they understand it or not. Allow those blessed words to permeate their souls. Now there's like a rail that we're placing them on. They're moving in a particular direction. But like I said, he's saying here what? It's a hazardous shay. It's shabbaba, shab, literally someone who writes love letters, someone who's emotional, someone inclined towards desires. And again, we're so blessed in our tradition. Look at it's going to come up inshallah when we look at the Dajjal and the Mahdi. But Sayyidina Hudhayfa said what? The biggest fitna to befall mankind, the biggest fitna to befall mankind is what? Masih al-Dajjal. Sayyidina Hudhayfa said what? Lo kharaj ad-Dajjal fi zamanikum. Right? If the Dajjal came in your time, he goes, the Sibyan, the kids of Medina would kick him out. Not the companions, not the men of Medina, the Sibyan, the children of Medina would have kicked out what? The biggest fitna to befall mankind would have been taken care of by children. That's a weighty statement. But it's not made lightly either. So we have, again, examples that we can point to in our tradition, and we need examples we can point to in our tradition. And more importantly, we need people today that we can point to. I want my son to be like him. I want my daughter to be like that particular person. Imagine kicking out the biggest fitna, not by the rijal. And if that's what it's like for the Sibyan, then what were the women like? What were the men like? If the kids of Medina are going to take care of the Dajjal one time, boom. How much more for what? Those great men, those great women. So we have, example after example. We mentioned the verse in the Quran about Sayyidina Ibrahim alayhi salam, the great disruptor in relation to the worship of idols. And when the idols are smashed, what's the word that's mentioned in the Quran in relation to referencing Sayyidina Ibrahim? قَالُوا سَمِعْنَا فَتَى يَذْكُرُهُمْ يُقَالُ لَهُ إِبْرَاهِيمُ. Meaning, we heard about someone speaking ill about our idols. What does Allah say in the Quran? سَمِعْنَا فَتَى. About this youth. Sayyidina Ibrahim is not a grown man at this stage. He's a young'un. May Allah be pleased with him. Because the Quran is telling you this, that they said, the people of the city, we heard about a fata. يَذْكُرُهُمْ يُقَالُ لَهُ Ibrahim. He's someone called Ibrahim. But the important being here, again, is what? Youth. We've spoken about this before, and Allah allow us to, inshallah, study seerah and the like. How old is Osama bin Zayd when he takes a campaign out at what? The request of the Prophet ﷺ, leading people like Sayyidina Khalid, leading those great warriors. How old is he? 16. 16 years old. Again, tarbiyah. They got their education from who? They got their graduate degree from who? 16-year-old. I mean, even when people were fearful of Sayyidina Umar ibn Khattab and he accepts Islam, he's 27. That's young. To have that type of reputation in your community, someone who's revered, looked up to. They'd go to him for his, again we spoke about this, that if someone wanted to ask for the hand of a woman, Sayyidina Umar was the one who was eloquent in Arabic. He would go and give what's known as the khitbah, the address asking for the hand of a woman. 27 years old, he's still young. To have that type of standing amongst his community. Where are our men? Where are they? How many people, I don't know Luton that well. How many people in Luton can we point to that have that type of, that reputation as rijal from the youth? Where are the women? Again, we want to point to the women of our community because we have many in that tradition. We have many in that community. We have many in that generation that we can point to as these lofty examples of who we want to be like from the youth, from, quote unquote, being young'uns, youth. That's part and parcel of our tradition. And it's not something unique or specific for that first generation. It's not restricted to them. We spoke about this in the last lesson, how, the faqih's daughters had in Hadramaut all of these examples, these lofty role models that they could aspire to be like. So we have this within our tradition. And the point being what? The point being here what? Aim high. Inna Allah yuhibbu ma'ali al-umur. That's the Prophet saying this. Allah loves lofty affairs. وَيَكْرَهُ سَفْسَافِهَا. And he dislikes, when the bar is low. Don't think this is beyond us to rear this generation that will stand in the first rows alongside Imam Mahdi from the children of this community. This is nothing for God. This is nothing for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to decree this. We just have to take it a little bit seriously. And we should be aiming high. And so he mentions again how unusual it is to find a youth in obedience, and that even Allah يُعْجِبُ مِنَ الشَّابِ لَيْسَتْ لَهُ صَبْوَةٌ, that God is amazed by a youth that doesn't have these passions and desires. Yes, we understand human nature. خُلِقَ الْإِنسَانُ ضَعِيفًا. Your Lord tells you in the Quran, we have created human beings in weakness. Our inclination is weak. And the tafsir of that verse particularly is about what? The sexual inclination of mankind. That's where the biggest weakness lies. The appetites, which we've spoken about time and time again. Hence, young people should be very careful to protect themselves against being dragged into God's wrath. and painful chastisement simply by their youthfulness. Because he's saying here what? Youth is that golden period, that golden stage again, for you to just to get cha-ching, all of those good deeds, all of that energy placed in what? Something that's securing Yawm al-Qiyamah, the shade of God on that day. Don't act in a way, or don't facilitate for your child to act in a way, which is why, again, it's not what? La'ibhum sab'a, play with them for 7, wa'adihum sab'a, and now inculcate manners in them for 7 years, wasahibhum. Make sure that you're part of that formula, that equation that's facilitating this for your child. Don't allow them to fall into what? The chastisement of God, wa'iyadhu billah, simply by their youthfulness. Let them instead make it a means and a ladder leading up to the good pleasure of Allah and His tremendous reward. Right? His tremendous reward. La ilaha illallah. You know, Habib Umar came here many years ago. He said that people in this community should be married at the age of what? By the age of what? And honestly, I know it's difficult. Trust me, it's not easy. You are a difficult bunch to get married off to one another. I mean, he said 18. He said no one in the UK should be 18 and they're unmarried. And I'm not again dismissing the challenges of getting married here in the UK. Al-Muhim. Why mention that? Because that's a safety for you. The things that we're speaking about, falling into desires, falling into, the safety is to do that via what? The confines of marriage. Ya ma'shar al-shabab. Again, why mention this? Because the addresses to the prophetic addresses to who? The shabab, youth. And the Prophet says, Ya ma'shar al-shabab, man istata'a minkum al-ba'a, that if you're able to support a wife, فَيَتَزَوَّجْ, when you can do it, get married. فَإِنَّهُ أَغَضُّ لِلْبَصَرِ, because it's what will aid you safeguarding your eyes from things that they shouldn't see. وَأَحْسَنُ لِلْفَرْجِ, and likewise it safeguards you from falling into immorality. وَمَنْ لَمْ يَسْتَطِعْ فَعَلَيْهِ بِالصَّوْمِ فَإِنَّهُ لَهُ وِجَاءٌ, and if those who are unable to take care of a wife, then let him fast. But the point being what? This is the first part of the hadith. Ya ma'shar al-shabab. This wasn't addressed to people who are in their 30s, 40s. No. Oh, young men, young women, get married. Get married. Get married. It's an immense safety in that from all of the things that we just mentioned in this past hour. And then the last thing he speaks about here, or the last thing we're going to speak about here, is youth is the time when acquiring merit, knowledge, and attaining positions of religious leadership and eminence are possible. A poet once said, if a youth has nothing to boast about when he reaches 20 years, he'll never have anything to boast about. You see, again, how many 20-year-olds can we point to in our communities? So he brings a line of poetry, and another declared, if you do not prevail in the nights of youth, then you shall never prevail. There's no doubt he's highlighting a point. It's never too late. It's never too late to change yourself. It's never too late to turn back to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It's never too late to change and better your situation. But these are understandings. That if you do not prevail in the nights of youth, then you shall never prevail, though you live long. Is most of your life other than youth? Take what you can from it and do not neglect it. And then he says that, La ilaha illallah Rasulullah. Those of our righteous predecessors who lived long in the way of God and in His obedience used to urge young people to seize the chance offered by youth, saying, use your youth before you became old like us, feeble and too weak to perform acts of many goodness. They said this even though despite their circumstances, they were outstripping youngsters in striving for God and in zeal and determination of His obedience. So it's a parting address that he gives. And then the part before that, sorry, which I just omitted, he speaks about here about companionship. Okay, just the importance of this as well. We cannot not focus or highlight the importance of how you're affected. And when we were studying this, our teachers brought the example of who? And he brings the verse in the book that the impressionable nature of being a youth and how you're affected by bad company. And he says that, he brings the first hadith, we'll finish on this, إنه لا تزول قدم عبد يوم القيامة حتى يسأل عن عمره فيما أفناه وعن علمه فيما فعله وعن ماله فأين اكتسبه وفيما انفقه وعن جسمه فيما أبلاه. And then he brings the verse ويوم يعض الظالم عن يديه. That the verse says what? a day that the zalim, the oppressor, will bite on his hands, saying what? يَقُولُ يَا لَيْتِنِي اتَّخَذْتُ مَعَ رَسُولِ اللَّهِ سَبِيلًا. How I wish I had followed the path of the messenger. And the tafsir of this particular verse is what? Is about Uqba ibn Abi Mu'ayt. So there's a man called Uqba ibn Abi Mu'ayt. He was a friend of who? Umayy ibn Khalaf, the one who chastised and tortured Sayyidina Bilal. And so Uqba, he invites people to his house, he invites the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And so when he invites the Prophet, people are eating, and the Prophet refused to eat his food. And he goes, why will you not eat? And he goes, I'll only eat after you testify that I am the messenger of God. And so Uqba, he testified that the Prophet ﷺ was the messenger of God. Not only because of that incident, because he had heard the Prophet speak and he was convinced by his message, but he was friends with who? And again, he's going to show what? The nature of being friends with people who are going to harm you. That he's very close with Umayy ibn Khalaf. And so he takes the Shahada, and then the Prophet departs, and it gets to Umayy ibn Khalaf that his close friend Uqba has taken the Shahada. And so he comes to him and he goes, Sabot, meaning have you abandoned the religion of your forefathers? So then, because of their closeness and the effect of Umayy ibn Khalaf, Uqba says what? He goes, no, he goes, I haven't. He goes, but a man came to my house and I was embarrassed because he didn't eat, so I said what he wanted to say just so he could eat. And so Amir says to him what? He goes, that I will never spend time with you until you go and spit in the face of Muhammad. And because again, the effects of that negative let's call it friendship, in truth it's an enemy because of his conclusion. So he goes and he looks at the Prophet ﷺ and he spits in his face. Well, he attempts to spit in his face. Imam al-Dahhak says what? In his tafsir, he goes, the spit comes out of his mouth, splits in two, goes back and strikes him on his face and burns and scars his face because he attempted to spit on the Prophet ﷺ. And that these particular people, these particular people, Umayy ibn Khalaf and Uqba ibn Umayd, that's what this verse says. Specifically for them, يوم القيامة يوم يعض الظالم عن يديه. That they're going to be biting themselves on that day. وَيَقُولُ يَا لَيْتَنِي اتَّخَذْتُ مَعَ رَسُولِ اللَّهِ سَبِيلًا. How I wish I had taken a path alongside the Prophet ﷺ. Too late. Too late. You've allowed yourself for what? Some type of stupid friendship to do something which is the most heinous of things. And even after, you think what? After the spit came back and burnt your face, take the message, take the hint, make tawbah. No. That friendship was that deleterious to them that they're going to die. They died upon that. Obviously, we know the end of Umayy ibn Khalaf in relation to Sayyidina Bilal. But this person here, verse, Quran revealed that we recite to this day about the outcome of what? This individual. And so, what's my point here? You can be endeavoring to do all of those things in relation to the youth. But if we're not paying attention to who they spend their time with, it could all be done in vain. May Allah safeguard us from, inshaAllah.